Welcome back to the Beyond Broadcast podcast, brought to you by the team at WizFX, a show which takes a behind-the-scenes look at industry professionals and their lives working in the broadcasting and entertainment industry. And I'm very lucky today to be speaking with Ita O'Brien, one of the pioneering voices behind the rise of intimacy coordination in film, television and theatre, and founder of the organisation Intimacy on Set. Ita has helped reshape how intimate scenes are approached on screen, advocating for safer, more collaborative and emotionally grounded storytelling through her internationally recognised Intimacy on Set guidelines. Her work has featured across many smash hit productions including Normal People, Sex Education, I May Destroy You, just to name a few. Additionally, her book Intimacy, a field guide to finding connection and feeling your deep desires, is a fantastic resource which explores intimacy far beyond performance and production, diving into connection, communication, vulnerability and human relationships. And awesomely enough, the UK paperback edition is due to be released on June 4th. That was a lot, Ita, and you've got a lot to talk about and we've got a lot to cover, so I'm looking forward to it. Welcome to the show.
Jamie, thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure to be talking with you, and I'm really looking forward to this journey of talking about intimacy, both in our lived lives and on screen.
I think the beautiful thing about this, Ita, is we've had some conversations beforehand, and getting to explore your life has been incredibly interesting. Now, when we jumped on this previous call, we were having a wee chat about how this was going to look. We talked about your early years and the irony of the fact that you eventually fell into this role of intimacy coordination, which largely, I know, many people would assume it's all about sex and everything else. There's a lot more to it, obviously. But it's funny to me considering your parents came from rural Ireland, very Catholic, which I know Catholic guilt is a big thing. And from all assumptions aside, I would assume your parents were very conservative and your childhood was very conservative. Would that be a correct assumption?
That's absolutely spot on assumption. Very strict Irish Catholic parents, where talking about emotions and intimacy just didn't happen. We were told by our dear biology teacher, as she was about 8.5 months pregnant in the one lesson that we did biology, that of course this active intercourse can only happen within the bounds of matrimony and only with the intention of conceiving a baby. Doesn't happen other than that. And because it doesn't happen, then you don't talk about it. And of course, in that lack of openness, in that lack of education is where there's shame, guilt, coercion, just again, everything that is unhealthy around any subject matter that's shrouded in secrecy and guilt and shame. It can't be positive. And my journey was coming from that place, and then I ended up writing a piece of work about part of my family's Irish Catholic dynamic, that was challenging in that area, and that's what's so beautiful for me about the sharing of this work in the industry is that I wrote my play April's Fool and put that on in 2009. And then I was extracting the core of that and inspired by the Forgiveness Project, where this wonderful journalist had been doing interviews with the perpetrators and the victims of the bombings in Northern Ireland in the Troubles, and then realising the power of restorative justice. And so my R&D called Does My Sex Offend You? And was looking at the dynamic of the perpetrator and the victim, and how very often it's the flip side of the same coin. But I was going, how do I, as a director, as a producer, as a facilitator, hold a really wonderful and safe rehearsal process that allows my actors to be present in themselves with the ensemble and in the space, so that they're really present-centered and grounded and articulated and alive, so they can then be really clear as I step into either this dynamic of being the perpetrator or being the victim, and be really present and conscious. And then at the end of that process, how to again step back, let go of what you've explored, honor yourself for the exploration and the humanity that you've, sort of created in whatever dynamic you're exploring, and come back to self. And in that place, that's where one of my wonderful colleagues, Meredith Dufton, who's a head of movement at Mountain View, said, please come and start teaching what you're developing. You are creating a structure by which we can explore this kind of intimate content in a really professional way. So that was the beginning of what ended up becoming Intimacy on Set Guidelines. That was April 2015. But then I started teaching this, process that I had been exploring.
There must be some real intensity in those sort of case scenarios where you're having actors embody either end of the scale. Did you ever feel like there was some moments where you got to see kind of actors really emotionally connecting in that way and sometimes at a scary point? And how do you support them through that? Because I can imagine embodying the perpetrator in some respect can be quite an overwhelming feeling for many actors.
So it's wonderful that you have that awareness, because that's exactly what I discovered in that exploration. So I did 2 rounds of research and development, one in the August of 2014. I held a week at Central School of Speech and Drama, and the second week was I got accepted onto the Barbican Pit, and they would support you in a week of R&D, research and development, at the Barbican Pit space whenever it was dark. And that's exactly what I discovered in the first week, was that we just explored the dynamic of being the catcalling on the streets. So something that's technically quite light. But everybody, and I had, mixture of, men and women, LGBT, people from the LGBT community and from different, global majority practitioners from different cultures. And everybody had been affected by being catcalled. Doesn't matter, man, woman, or whatever. But yes, and my process was to explore, to find a moment, and then to delve into it and move it, and then find the physical score through moving it, and then extracting that physical score and making sort of like a physical choreography out of that. So the day that we explored the victim was that, but then the following day, when I invited everybody, to explore, when might you have been the one that pushed or the one that took? And oh my goodness, was that the day where for people to truly, think about and acknowledge when they might have been the ones that took, like I say, or pushed. So my awareness was, oh my goodness, yes, you need to take care of the person or playing the victim, but oh my goodness, you need to take care as much, if not even more so, playing the perpetrator. And I had one of my cast members in that R&D that said, but I think of myself as a nice person. And oh my goodness, the physical score that they had created was so embodied and beautiful and raw. And they said, I realized all I need to do to be the perpetrator is to stand with my arms out. And I already, have that sense of that power and domination. And I said, what you have created. And then I put I saw the different scores of the perpetrator and the scores of the victim, and then sort of chose then to put them together and see what kind of couples, straight relationships were coming out. And, they performed something absolutely wonderful and amazing. And I was saying, what you have offered and what you have explored for this R&D is absolutely beautiful, perfect, vulnerable, because it's vulnerable to equally step into the perpetrator. But they found it really challenging. And they didn't speak to me for 2.5 years. And then 2.5 years later, I got an email from them, and I felt like, and they sort of were talking about the reflections, what had happened, what had gone on, and where they were at. And I realized that arc was what it took them to really interrogate and explore what they discovered. But because of that, I then, in preparation for the following year in 2015, I then sourced an artist wellbeing practitioner, because my realization was exactly that, Jamie, that actually I can hold the space and I can have that intention of holding the space. But what comes up for people, therapeutically isn't my domain, but I do need, as a strong facilitator, to provide that kind of support. So that's what I did. I sourced an artist wellbeing practitioner. I actually worked with a lady called Lou Platt, and I brought them into the R&D in 2015. So they were there, certainly for the day that we explored the perpetrator, but then they were there to hold the space at the end of the day for anybody to come and talk about, what had come up and how they felt about it. And then she offered ongoing counselling support following that work. And then that's part of the practice that I've developed when I developed the intimacy coordination practice, equally on set, that, so you mentioned I may destroy you. So if I'm reading a script and I'm recognizing there is challenging and possibly activating content here, then, what I offer to a producer is I can support and I can recognize, but I don't have those skills, and nor should I have. They have a whole training. And artist wellbeing practitioners, to be clear, they come from being artists themselves invariably. so that they understand what their role is. But then they're all people who have trained properly, for the, amount of years that they need to be counsellors and psychotherapists and psychologists, and then work as artist wellbeing practitioners, which again is an overall counselling, but they're coming in and absolutely focusing on knowing what's required of the performer to show up and to be able to offer them their skills as a performer, but helps them to go, okay, what's happening for you personally? What skills and techniques do we need to put in place to help you not negate what's going on, but, to be able to hold it in whatever way that they therapeutically can support with, so that they can show up for the day of work, the day on set, and then how to then debrief from that and, support them in, so that then perhaps bringing out parts of themselves that they were taking care of. So that's been a very important part of that R&D, but then of now what's offered through, as an intimacy coordinator with a really robust practice. And that aspect as well, it's a real joy. I was that artist wellbeing practitioners are now, also part of what's been welcomed on set and is becoming part of best practice, along with a wellbeing facilitator who's someone who's there on set to support the mental health of all the cast and crew. So in the time that I've been developing the intimacy on set guidelines, and then saying this is best practice when there's challenging to content, and that wellbeing facilitator has also been developed. And that's just truly fabulous. And then along with the accessibility coordinator, so the person who understands and comes on set when you're working with actors with learning or physical disability. So all of that has been just astounding and joyous. And for me, all of those practitioners support everybody on a production to be able to, it's not about, is people sometimes say, oh God, flaky and woke. It's like, no. It's actually being really robust, really professional, really vulnerable, acknowledging that. So actually everybody, be it the producer, director, DOP, sound operator, costume, whoever it is, you're supporting everybody to be able to show up and be the best of themselves, offering the best of their skill when they have that emotional and psychological support.
I love that, because I think that's the thing I've always found interesting and why I really enjoyed looking into your work, Ida, because everything comes down to systems and structure. And I think the thing that I always found interesting in the film and television industry is there's always system and structure in the things that are obviously forward-facing in production or in post-production as well, but they don't really consider, much like what you've said, the kind of emotional needs of actors and actresses when they're performing. And much like what you were describing as well, there's almost like a meditative state that they need to get into to be able to achieve it, but then also have the support to be able to kind of get through that point and pull themselves back and getting an understanding of where it is. One thing I'd love to kind of rewind on, because I love the fact that you use the terminology of choreography all the time when you're describing it, which very much comes from your background in dance as well as also theatre, among other things. So when you're working with many of your clients and customers, and I should say probably actors, is that sort of where you see yourself? You're like the dance director still? Because I think for most people, all they think about when they think about intimacy coordinator is someone directing a sex scene, when there's a lot more that goes on than that. Do you see it as a sort of a dance when you are working with many of your actors?
So that's the awareness that we brought to the industry, is going, this isn't two people fancy each other and, getting their rocks off and having a good time, and it happens to be filmed. And a big part of what we brought to the industry as well is going, this is our workplace. And the irony was that people could really get that sort of an actor was acting in all other realms, but before the role of the intimacy coordinator and the structure of the intimacy on-set guidelines, this realm of the intimate content fell in this huge crack of confused expectations that suddenly that of course they were acting in every other bit, but they had to really fancy each other and they had to really, have a good time with each other for it to really look good. And I was lifting the lid and going, no, this is also acting. And then the other aspect is that you don't expect everybody to walk off the street and know how to do a good waltz or tango. So of course you need a choreographer to come and teach the steps and then choreograph. Of course you don't expect someone to walk off the street and be able to know how to have a sword in their hand and do really good sword play, look professional, and then do a really good fight that both serves the character storytelling but also doesn't kill someone. So, of course, you need a stunt coordinator. But the confusion with the intimate content was, well, everybody has sex. So we don't need a practitioner to come and choreograph that. So, and that is confused. That's confusing who we are personally with what someone is offering and what an actor is offering professionally. And then the other aspect was, people know that then they're bringing in that choreographer to teach a waltz or tango, or they are, as I've just said, as someone you put a sword in someone's hand, you're making sure that people don't, have someone's eye poked out or worse, and you're mitigating that risk of injury. And it's very actual to be able to talk about someone going over on their ankle in trying to learn how to do a tango, and so that injury damaging someone, injuring someone, they might have their foot in plaster, and the producers are mitigating that if that means that actor has to have 6 weeks without being able to film, then that's insured for. And the same with the stunt coordination, that possible injury is acknowledged, is spoken about, and is insured for. Now, the shift with the intimacy injury, and this was a big part of why then it was finally listened to and heard to bring in intimacy coordination, is that the injury that comes from being asked to suddenly take your clothes off through to nakedness that you weren't expecting, or suddenly being touched in all very intimate body parts that are actually beyond your boundaries and make you feel vulnerable, or coerced into some sort of sexual content that isn't suitable for you. The impact of that is an injury, but it's an injury that's emotional and psychological, and, as it were, unseen. And so that where it wasn't mitigated for, and it wasn't suable until the tipping point over the Weinstein allegations, and then the subsequent Time's Up and Me Too movements, and the industry saying, yes, of course we knew about all of this. Yes, we knew that someone would say, oh, the intimate scenes are awkward, to feeling harassed, to feeling absolutely abused. It was just known, but it wasn't suable. And that shift to then the Harvey Weinstein allegations and subsequently knowing that actually this is a serious injury, and actually very often it's a far more serious injury than going over on an ankle. If someone has been, has that ripple effect of severe emotional and psychological injury from, like I say, touch, nudity, whatever. That was a shift also, that the producers and our society going, no, this is really, really serious and we need to mitigate against it. And then, of course, the third aspect is that, as we've just touched on, and from my family, from that culture, the Irish Catholic culture, to talk about intimacy, periods, intercourse, condoms, whatever you might want to talk about, didn't happen, and if you did, the shame, the secrecy, blah, blah. So in our society, again, just fundamentally to talk openly in an actual fashion, in a professional fashion around intimate content, just wasn't given a forum. And I have had directors say to me, if I felt that I really wanted to delve into an open and creative conversation before the intimacy onset guidelines about the intimate content, that they would be considered the ones who was being overly sexualized and a bit pervy. And then the relief from producers and directors that now that process is in place, it's lifting the lid and inviting, in fact, saying you're more professional by considering the intimate content and having that open and creative conversation. And before then, again, it was the elephant in the room, the thing that wasn't spoken about, the thing you've read the script, you know what's on the page, and that expectation you'll just show up and put up and just do it. So that's the third thing. And then the other thing within all of that, which I have found truly incredible and was in my awareness as I was developing the work, but the ripple effect is just that really consciously going, this is our workplace, as I said before, and the expectation to override yourself, to override your boundaries, because the show must go on attitude actually is no longer suitable. And actually you're inviting an actor and, like I say, everybody to be more professional by actually opening out the conversation. And of course the irony is It doesn't stilt the work. It doesn't subdue it. It doesn't make it less exciting. Actually, when you lift the lid and you talk openly and creatively, you can be more exciting. You can be more, edgy. And again, the whole point is that we're in the place of drama. We're in the place of telling character storytelling. We're in the place of our actors, shape-shifting, becoming a character, and you're telling this character's intimate storytelling. And then in this creative exploration, you have the time and the space. In fact, you're inviting to be more professional, to have that professional, creative, exciting conversation. What do you want? So I always say to the directors, you tell me what's in your head. What's the image? What are you riffing off? And then make sure that the director tells the actor what's in your head. And that opens out the conversation, but everything comes from the director's vision. And then that open conversation going, great, now you know what's wanted, what's within your requirements. So say you want someone stepping into a shower, having showered by themselves, and then their lover steps in and then soaping everything up. Gorgeous, very, very sensuous and very lovely intimate scene. But then the actress might go, but I just had a baby and I'm still breastfeeding. So I'm happy for the influence of my character to step into that shower naked, but I want to be wearing a swimming costume that sort of comes around the small of my back and around and there's a halter neck so that my breasts and my belly aren't seen, but I can still give you and the production and the producer the influence of nakedness. So those kind of things, those kind of the conversations can now happen. And again, it means that those actors can show up and give the best of themselves, have a sensuous and glorious, intimate storytelling, while also personally know that they're being listened to, heard, that they're being empowered and they're autonomous in the creation of the scene. So then they can really step into character emotional storytelling with agreement and consent with their fellow actor personally, so that artistically they know what's happening, they know the shape of the choreography, and oh my goodness, then you lift the lid and then sparks can really fly.
And I love that, because I think the thing that I've really found interesting during this whole process of learning about yourself, Isha, and reading through your book is the amount of times you've seen or heard of, obviously, previous occasions where directors or producers have essentially pushed actors into situations that they didn't want to be, or surprised them with intimate situations which were very much not agreed upon. And having these guidelines seems like, as you said, it creates a safer environment, it professionalizes it, and not only that, it just establishes trust from everyone, which I love. And something I'd really like to touch on as well is the fact that you established some of the guidelines or started working some of the parts while working in productions or working at schools, drama departments. And I'd be really interested to kind of learn a little bit more about what that taught you during that process, or what were some of the unexpected results that you got from that work in those school productions, because it must have been very interesting to take it to a much younger audience where maybe there might have been a little bit of that guilt or shame associated with it. I certainly know as a teenager myself, having anyone want to speak about sex, intimacy, or anything in that regard of touch at the age of 15, 16, incredibly awkward. So how did you overcome that obstacle? And not only that, what were some of the learnings that you got from that period?
So, oh my goodness. I mean, some of the mistakes that I made was the first scenes that I chose were full-on simulated sex scenes, and realizing that I wanted my young actors to be able to bound out of having shared the process, feeling really empowered, and realizing that full-on simulated sex scene is way too much, way too soon. And so I pulled it back so that we were exploring, just a moment of intimacy. Invariably just a hug or a kiss. Yeah. So as far as teaching the work and teaching in drama schools, and that's where in my training I have 3 strands of certification: intimacy coordination for TV and film, intimacy direction for all live performance, and then intimacy pedagogy for teaching in drama schools, because it's a very different hat on with how you're sculpting and taking care of a student who's not yet professional and who's in fact invariably paying the school, and the school's duty of care around that young person. So really pulling it back so it's palatable, and someone can really get the process of the intimacy guidelines under their belt. And then the next major learning is really helping a performer to trust. The very early days, the students would say to me, "Can I really say no?" We're just told to say yes. We're told that, to be a professional, you do just, again, shut up, put up, and you show willing, you just say yes. And that was wonderful to actually tip that on its head and say, actually, in this process, what we're inviting is that actually you're being more professional, to listen to yourself. And actually that was a really important part as we were doing the workshop, is saying this isn't a pretend ready for life. This moment is life, and in this moment, perhaps, and invariably with students, I would have two acting students playing, the characters, and then one of the acting students playing the director. So they were all playing a role. And so in that moment, listening to yourself and going, am I happy to step into character and to be kissing this fellow classmate? Or does that feel a bit ick? So again, really supporting the actor to really listen to the self. And if there's a moment of ick, and then this is the next bit about consent, bringing in the idea of consent and the fundamentals of consent and saying consent is all. And then that's one of my realizations when I wrote about the Boundaries book, and I asked my partner to proofread it. And when I finished reading it, he came to me and went, oh my goodness. Reading your chapter has made me realize that intimacy is all about and only about consent. And if there is not consent, there isn't intimacy. It's about power. But for my partner to realize that. So that's what we've brought into the industry, is turning on its head. And instead of this coercion or just expectation to do this, do that, take clothes off, blah, 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 it's actually lifting it on its head and inviting someone to share their requirements. It's actually being more professional. But that's been quite a journey and a shift. For someone to go, really? Can I really listen into myself? And if I really say, actually, no, I'm not comfortable with this, that's going to be respected and listened to and heard and really honoured. And I'm going, yes, that is now what's on offer. So that's been interesting. Well, what's glorious is that as, this work has rippled through, our drama schools have really taken it on board. And now in so many of the handbooks, the language is consent-based training. Yeah, and nurturing consent-aware artists. Yeah, which is amazing. So those young artists are coming out of drama school with that expectation that this is how you work, which is great. But as we're still in that place of it rippling through, and older school directors and producers and actors, sort of from the old world. Oh no, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to connect with you. I just want to just do it. And in that place people aren't being conscious. So that's the next thing, is what we're inviting is true presence. We're saying, in order to be able to be really listening to yourself, I'm asking you to be really present with yourself. And again, in the olden days, it used to be, and I've had this when I shared the work, I've had costume departments from the US saying, we were told, oh, it's intimate scene this afternoon, you better get the Valium out. Or
it's ridiculous. Yeah.
Or it's the intimate scene, given a nip of whiskey. And both of those are acknowledging in an unconscious and unspoken way, this is something that is not very nice. And so let's get them not present with themselves so they can handle the scene. And again, how can someone truly be able to be present to give their agreement and consent and know that they're being empowered and autonomous if they're either on drugs or inebriated? And so again, that's the shift. We're going, no, be ultra conscious and connected with yourself so that you can listen to yourself. And again, as I say, that's a skill that we need to nurture and learn, because there's so often, you just override yourself. So listening to yourself. And then the quality and the aspects of consent. So consent is a process. It's not just a moment. Consent that might have been a no at the beginning of the process might very quickly turn to a yes, because trust is elicited. Or consent that was given in one moment might say, yes, I'm happy to do a simulated sex scene with nothing but a genitalia patch and nipple daisies. And then it comes to the day on set and they're menstruating. And they're going, no way am I being in anything less than flesh-coloured shorts. So that awareness of, we're inviting consent, and that consent is a process, not a moment. So it's constantly shifting and changing. So constantly listening to yourself. And then also that aspect that you're working only with an artist's freely given yes. So I'm saying your yes is your yes, your no is your no, but that place of maybe is also a no. Because in that place of maybe, and as an artist, your cells are not in free flow. You're going, oh, that might be all right. And it's just like, as soon as you're in that place, nah. So we're only working with someone that's a freely given yes. But also what I'm sharing with producers is that asking an artist to do anything other than that which is in their freely given yes is not going to give you, as a producer or the director, the product of that actor being in free flow, being open, feeling really comfortable and present in themselves to be able to step into character and to bring in free flow, and equally their fellow partner also know that there's agreement and consent, that they don't have to worry where they might be touched. They don't have to worry where they might be touched their partner. Is that okay or not okay? All of that's been dealt with. All of that's part of the process. We've journeyed through to make sure that agreement and consent of touch and where to touch, and agreement and consent of nudity, and agreement and consent of what modesty garments are required. All of that's been taken care of so that both those artists stepping into character and then performing that intimate scene either in front of a camera or in front of a stage, all of that's been journeyed through. And then what you get is every cell of that artist being telling that character story and telling that character story in relationship. Yeah. And the character might be awkward or the character might be nervous, but the actor is free. And you're seeing nothing but character storytelling. And what used to happen in the past is the expectation. And no agreement and consent. And so the actor personally might be going, oh, I'm going to this, but I don't know what's going to happen. And what you're seeing is this mismatch of the person, weirdness. And so suddenly that's where, that sense of, like I say, even awkward scenes, I used to be that whenever there's a sex scene, somehow there's a sense of awkwardness to it, I feel.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
I think that came from that place of the actor being awkward. Whereas, for example, there's so many of the intimate scenes in sex education were about these amazing teenagers exploring their first time sexual encounters. And so many of them were awkward. But I hope and I feel, that the joy of that program was because we as an audience can sit back and enjoy those characters' awkwardness because somehow we felt that we could stay enjoying them. And that's because the actors were personally listened to and taken care of. And then we only worked with what they were personally comfortable with.
Stand by. And we're live. The Beyond Broadcast Podcast.
I think it's a massive shift as well, and I think it's around the time that you were obviously developing these guidelines that there was a shift around the conversation of consent. I know you touched on Harvey Weinstein, the Me Too movement. Among other things, obviously consent became like the big word that people were talking about, which is odd when you think about it, that consent was only a thing that was recently discussed. And for all these previous years, it was like, no, as you much touched on, the idea that if you say yes at the beginning, it means it's a yes constantly, not a yes that can be retracted at any point. And one thing I'd really love to touch on as well, much like what I said, that the cultural change, it was a global change as well. And you mentioned very early on into the process, you had actually heard of a couple of New Zealanders, Jennifer Ward-Leland and Michael Hurst, who were very much looking at a similar sort of guidelines or kind of looking at how they could improve the industry from an intimacy standpoint. I think the conversation stemmed from, or the kind of beginning of this was in relation to many actors who were performing in big major productions in New Zealand, like Game of Thrones, among other things, and realizing they were being thrown into these crazy situations with no real safety net. So how was it that you two ended up, you managed to collaborate with a couple of Kiwis, among other things, and on top of that as well, how was it that this kind of developed as a global movement? Because I'm assuming, much like what you said, there was a lot of pushback, but how was it that you came to connect with each other, and how did that conversation kind of come about?
So I'd contacted British Equity, and they, saying, can I share what I'm developing with you? So this was in February 2017, and each department, TV, theatre, and then film, sent me their legal contracts, and I contacted them back and I said, these are great, and they are fit for purpose for what they're designed for, which is to be a legal contract, but they don't support the actor in the process and give them a really good and open professional process that supports them in their artistic journey. And do you have guidelines like that? And they said they didn't. But I Googled again, and then I suddenly found these really good guidelines for actors when performing simulated sex. And lo and behold, they were New Zealand equities guidelines. And then I looked a bit deeper, and what had happened was, as you said, that suddenly these big productions were coming to New Zealand. And so many of the, actors, and of course it's quite a small pool of actors in New Zealand, were being asked to perform intimate content without any guidelines or structure. And so Jennifer Ward-Leland has been president of New Zealand Equity for many, many years. And they called a green room event in October 2015, including with her husband, Michael Hurst. I didn't know that they were husband and wife at the time. And so I read the feedback about the green room event, and then subsequently from that came these guidelines, and I found these guidelines. And so I emailed Michael Hurst and then Jennifer Ward-Leland and asked her to meet with them. So I think it was a Tuesday evening, I'd arranged a Zoom with Michael Hurst to discuss and to share what I was developing. And Michael Hurst goes, "Oh, you have to excuse the noise, the banging that's going on in the kitchen. That's my wife over there." And then Jennifer was saying, as she was banging in here in the beginning of the conversation with me, was thinking, "Oh, I'm going to be having a conversation with someone that sounds a bit like that tomorrow morning." And over she comes, and there you go. So there's Michael Hurst and Jennifer Ward-Leland, beautiful, wonderful, king and queen of New Zealand theatre as a whole, two absolutely incredible, inspiring people. And so that's how I met the both of them. And I said to them, what you've created already is really wonderful, but my work is this. And I spoke about my work as a movement teacher, but more importantly, as a movement director. And then saying, in New Zealand, they didn't have movement directors. So the idea of a practitioner who helped to explore that, physical shift and physical transformation. And then I was saying I was taking my work into, creating the role of what became the intimacy coordinator. And I said, what you've created already is wonderful, but I actually want to expand it so that it encompasses the whole of a production and for all the different, roles, producers, into casting, director for theatre and for film. So I said, please, can I take the bare bones of what you've created and expand it into the intimacy onset guidelines? So that's how we got connected. But then, of course, Jennifer is so connected with equity in Australia and New Zealand, and there was and that's when then in the Christmas of 2017, Erin Jean Norval and Sophie Rees then had been developing and drawing together their dossier. So as a result of Erin Jean Norval's experiences in theatre and abuses in theatre, that she then was inspired to draw together or invite people to share their experiences of bad practice in theatre. And Erin Jean shared that with Equity, Australian Equity, in December of 2017, and Jennifer was at that meeting, and then they were charged with going around the globe and discovering best practice. And Jennifer said, "Oh, one of the people that you should talk to is Ita O'Brien." So I met with Erin Jean Norval in January of 2018, and I shared with her what I was doing, and then they wrote that into their recommendations that they shared back with Australian Equity in March of 2017. And then off the back of that, the Equity Foundation, the amazing Mary Cotter, invited me across to Australia and New Zealand. And I shared the work across Australia and New Zealand from November to December 2018. So I went to Perth, Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, Adelaide and Auckland. And I did I did 27 events over 5 weeks. And which included, for those that were interested in being an intimacy coordinator, an introductory day. So Jennifer Ward-Leland and then Tandy Wright, along with about another 6 or 7 others, were the first people that I trained with that introduction to intimacy coordination. And then Tandy Wright and Jennifer Ward-Leland were the first 2 people in New Zealand that became the first fully accredited intimacy onset practitioners. So that was the dovetailing and the amazingness from having met them and taken on their work, and then bringing this work back to New Zealand. And then Jennifer is such an incredible practitioner. And then just a reminder, sort of not only is she, being an actor, a producer, a teacher, she was made a companion of the New Zealand Order of Merit, for services to theatre and television. That's right, in 2019. And then, of course, she was also honoured with being named the New Zealander of the Year in 2020. And I love it. What she says, I feel I am doing the work of the goddess when she's working as an intimacy coordinator. So, of course, her standing in the industry and then being one of the main people that has championed and supported and shared the role of the intimacy coordinator in New Zealand is absolutely been respected and, sort of has been established. So it's been an absolute joyous collaboration.
And the journey itself has been incredible for you both because of the fact that there's just been so much that has gone on. And if we're going to kind of take it back for you in terms of the first production work you were doing, introducing the industry to intimacy coordination, in 2018, you walked onto the set of Sex Education for that first season with a framework that would obviously reverberate. It would go through the whole industry. People were talking about it, and even more so, it was being discussed on industry websites about the fact that your involvement in this would include, obviously, your coordination. So was it emotional for you, like kind of seeing that first project come to light and being able to be like, this is ideally what the standard is going to be from now on? Like, what was the reaction on set on that first day?
Well, of course, I didn't know that at the time. So when I first had the interview with John Jennings and Ben Taylor, and first of all, what was glorious is that they'd heard me speak about the work, and they knew that they wanted to support their amazing young cast in the creation of this content. And then, of course, Laurie Nunn's writing was so brave and real and out there and authentic. So I felt so blessed that it was such an incredible script. And then their intention was, and my kids were still teenagers at the time, and so were Ben Taylor's. And so he was saying that he was aware there's so many of young people now that the internet is there, and so therefore pornography is so easily accessible, and that has been a main place to learn for our young people. And Ben and John consciously saying, we know and we hope that this might be an alternative. So with that intention in mind, and I said to them, look, I've developed this work in drama schools. I now teach the work both in drama schools and in the industry. I know what the process of how it works and that journey of, interrogating the script, understanding what the structure is, getting up on its feet, agreement and consent to touch, then agreement and consent of the basic shapes of choreography. And then you can really step into character and then explore. And then you can be detailed and different every performance through that structure. That I knew. But then how it gets delivered within, the flow of, a TV series that, of course, always what you're looking at is being efficient, serving the producer, being time effective on set. That was the bit that I said, we need to work together to work out how this works. And so, the very, very first day on set, we arranged to rehearse during the flow of the filming day, and it was very energetic, very full on intimate scene. And of course, we were, going time, because the rehearsal took about an hour, way too long. And I was, we came away and we're going, this can't happen. And we're going, no, I don't want it to happen like that either. And also it's a body dance and it's choreography, so it will always be better if it's been rehearsed before the moment on set. And so either we got into, and then I would speak to producers about, let's work out when there's a cheap time, as in when there's a time that we can rehearse that's not going to ask more of the actor's time, but also isn't expecting all the crew to stand around while that choreographic moment is happening. And so we would get to then perhaps even at the end of a day on set, if those two actors were going to be on set tomorrow, then all the crew going home, cast go back, get into Tractor Bottoms, come back to set, and then we'll rehearse it. And it never takes more than half an hour, really. And again, you're relaxed and comfortable, and we're going, okay, what's the scene? Who are these characters? What's the storytelling? Let's find the shape of it. And they go, yeah, okay, got enough of that, thank you. And again, just that's really bringing this is a body dance, as you were, reflecting earlier. And when you have that choreography in your body, in your nervous system, and you go home and you sleep on it, then you could and again, it takes away the concern and the fear of what's going to be asked of me, where am I going to be touched, what's the nudity, all of that's being talked about in advance. And again, that dovetailing and care with the costume department for all the modesty garments, and then things like with the makeup department, if there's, say they want a genitalia hair, then you can have a wigged merkin. So it's a wigged genitalia hair. So it looks like someone's naturally naked, but they're again completely professional and covered. Or perhaps someone's got loads of tattoos and that those tattoos don't serve this character. So you're also working out with the makeup department, how much time does that need? And so then you're making sure that time in makeup, all those kind of considerations are spoke about and worked out in advance, so that the day on set you come, all of those timings are known. And then invariably when you come back to set, and it literally takes minutes. And as a part of the professional process, what we will do as the intimacy coordinator is once that rehearsal is done, I will go away and I'll write, beat 1 is this, beat 2 is this, beat 3 is this, and I write it out, even if it's just the night before. So I'll write it out, and then the second AD will type it out, and it'll be on their cast desk along with the directors and the producers, along with a call sheet, so that they can reread it, re-remember it, and then we get to set and re-find it, and away we go. So those kind of things were part of what we were working out. And then things like cast have the autonomy to see the intimate content before it goes out to the world. And there are 3 times at which that can happen. One is they can come around straight away from seeing the setup and seeing and filming that moment, and then they come around, they can see it and they go, yeah, really happy. Or you can see the rushes that are brought together the next time they're on set. Or you can wait and you can until there's a rough cut of the edit, and then the actors are either sent that footage or they're brought into the edit suite to be able to watch it. Because again, what's really important, and this wasn't there in the past, that the actor, if they're offering their nakedness or their simulated sexual content, it's really important that they have the opportunity to see it before it goes out to the world. So again, they're not made vulnerable by perhaps it being a camera angle that's more exposing than they were expecting. So and again, I have to be careful, because we're not saying, oh, if you see a bit of cellulite that you don't like on your thigh, that you can suddenly say you can't use it. That's not what it's about. It's about making sure that your requirements are honoured and that you're seeing it, so that you're really happy as the artist.
That consent, that kind of agency that you talk about throughout your book. Yeah.
So things like that are put in place. And then closure, again, a really important part of the process. That just as you warm up and you step into character, if you've been in that place of your sexual energy, you've gone to a place, and so it's acknowledging that. An actor will invariably do a high five, and even that clap, that is so important. Having a hug, thanking each other for taking care of each other. And then I ask, sometimes a director wants to be part of that, and then what techniques do you want to do to be able to help bring closure? Is that enough? Do you just want to go away and have a break and have a cigarette if you're someone that does that? Do you want me to support you perhaps in a waterfall exercise, imagining that that's now gone, washing that energy away so that you can again just reset and go and then recalibrate, ready for the next scene? It's so important, because it's acknowledging that sexual energy is powerful, and you've gone somewhere, and that needs to be honoured and acknowledged and respected and let go of before you can step into the next scene. But all of that's new, and working out how you do that and the timings that it takes. All of that was, just working it out and making sure that you have my realization is invariably when anything went wrong, it's when do you have to have the conversation? At what point, so that everything's known, so that day on set and all those requirements can flow easily.
This podcast is powered by WizFX. We make brands sound sick. Music, radio, podcasts, sonic branding. If your audio needs to hit harder and stick longer, WizFX has you covered. Learn more at wizfx.com.
And I think I really want to touch on something which I was shocked to read this, but obviously some people fear boundaries. They fear that they almost outright refuse to see the importance of the role itself. And you discussed this in some length in an interview that I saw, where you mentioned that at one point you even had some pretty major hostility from some senior executives from various films who have spoken about the fact that they didn't see the use in it. And I think the thing I'd be really curious to touch on, because I'm sure you probably had actors in your time thank you for your contributions and thank you for the work that you've done. Was that further proven in that fact, by the fact that you're seeing these people that are trying to go against the grain, I guess, in a sense, and saying, there's no need for consent, there's no need for rehearsals, we just smash bang, let's get it done and let's go through it. Do you feel like it really has had a massive effect on the performance of the actors? Because you did touch on this as well. You can tell when actors aren't fully involved or fully there consenting in terms of also confidence as well. Was it something that you kind of noticed even on that first day?
So, so those early productions had the intention of bringing me on board and then supporting the work. And while it was challenging, there was a sense of really us all trying to work to the best of our ability to work it out, to do it well. And the interesting thing is that those early productions, so Sex Education, Gentleman Jack, Watchmen, Normal People, I May Destroy You, look at how they've hit the zeitgeist. So there's some magic in that, and that intention of the duty of care. And it's so lovely. There's a production that I didn't work on, but the intimate content that they have put in place. I was just reading about it this morning, and I haven't seen the production yet, so I can't talk about it. But just listening to the director's intention, this drama is called Believe Me, and it's about two young women being having abusive happenings in a taxi. So like I say, I haven't seen it yet, but what the director is talking about is really that duty of care, both with the artist wellbeing practitioner and with the intimacy coordinator and with the wellbeing facilitator. So just reading, that it came out on Sunday. I haven't seen it yet. It's just wonderful to see. It's exactly that is like, wow, how wonderful is that? It makes my heart sing that best practice is there, and they're championing it, and the cast are giving interviews to say this is how we were taken care of. So the fact that it is being established is just amazing.
And also, I'd love to jump to your book, in particular, some of the projects that you worked on, and some of these major projects I love personally, and I love the way that you go into greater detail in describing kind of the different aspects of it. And one in particular, out of the three I'd like to touch on, first off, is Lady Chatterley's Lover. You discuss the challenge of kind of showing the rhythm of a spark igniting of intimacy. And I love this because it's not something that's often touched on. And you did kind of talk about it at the beginning. It's not like everyone just rips their clothes off and starts having sex. There has to be that kind of moment of attraction, or kind of the first spark. And I really want to dive into that, because how do you kind of establish that rhythm of the first moment of love or lust or whichever without immediately jumping to physical contact, which is what everyone assumes is the thing you need to jump into?
Okay, so for me as an actor, what I'm bringing to this industry, to producers, directors, is exploring the arc of the intimacy. Just as any good actor would interrogate, what the arc of this character's emotional journey is. So that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at, where does it begin? And it always begins with the gaze. First time that they lay eyes on each other. But also, as with Lady Chatterley's Lover, it doesn't mean, that they both first lay eyes on each other and they see each other. So as with Lady Chatterley's Lover, you've got the first moment where Mellors is on the bridge with his dog and he's looking down at Connie as she's washing her face, and just, and it's so beautifully shot. So that spark of who is this person? And then she sees him as he's playing with his dog. And then there's a later moment where she's going to visit him, and he's in his hut and he's having a shower outside, fully naked in nature. And again, that was telling so much about who this person is, and she sees him and then comes back. So those three moments, sort of that 1, 2, 3, before they, we really have those sparks to hit it off together. So I'm clocking those, and I'm not needed to be present on set, but in my conversations with the directors, I'm just sharing. So I will always do a scene breakdown form, and identifying the intimate content, and then talking about it. So that's my artistic understanding of the arc of intimacy, and I might talk about that with the director. So I'm hearing from the director what their vision is, and for me, knowing that it comes from there. Did the same with Empire of Light, the amazing and beautiful film with Olivia Colman and Michael Ward. And again, that the first moment, that the gaze and the frisson, So I'm helping and being aware of what the director wants and, what the journey is, so that when they do finally come to touch, which is where I will be brought in, that I'm in sync with what the director wants, what the both actors want. Because of course, actually, I had the joy when I was in Melbourne of one of the people who came on the course in 2018 was one of the directors on Neighbours. And it was really lovely in that, they were saying, well, look, okay, we rehearse the fight scenes, but we just do the intimate scenes. And they brought a scene that they'd done before and they just went into doing it. And I'm going, please just give it a pause. I know you have choreographed this already. You've already talked to your actors through doing this. Just take a step back and I just offer you to explore this way of doing it. And they also had an actor who was so nervous of doing intimate scenes that whenever they received a script and there was any intimacy in it, they just wouldn't even bother to audition for the role because they would be so nervous. And there's so many actors that are like that. So I was saying, you have a duty of care and please just try this out. And oh my goodness, this moment was created that was utterly stunning. And at the end of it, the director was saying, oh my goodness, of course. We spend 3 months with the frisson in the writing of a soap, leading up to this moment that they get together, and then we give that moment of getting together no time. But of course, that's what we as an audience love, and that's what I'm clocking as the intimacy coordinator in my preparation for making sure I'm supporting the emotional arc. That's where it starts, and as that the director said, and of course the build-up is just lusciously beautiful, isn't it? As an audience member, the suspense and will they, won't they, and getting together. That's actually almost where so much of the eroticness and the sensuousness is, and you want to then make sure that when it comes together, that then the payoff is as sensuous and gorgeous and everything as everything that you've been promised in the lead up. But in a way, that's what then we're opening up the conversation that is where the intimacy begins. And then actually when it comes to touch, then can those two people, then explore something that serves all the frisson that we've been experienced before or not, which is also good storytelling.
Exactly. It's the reality of intimacy, much like what you said. We don't rip our clothes off in any other setting, so why do it there? There needs to be the build-up, and much like what you said, in any normal relationship, there is that build-up, that moment of first gaze, among other things. And another project I'd really love to touch on, Ita, is the Michaela Cole, obviously, who wrote and starred in I May Destroy You, dedicated her BAFTA win for Best Actress to you. You had scenes which you touched on very incredibly sensitive topics, and among others, one that really stood out to me was around sexual assault, and I'd like to reference in particular the selfing scene in episode 4 of the series, in which the main character Arabella's date removes his condom while they're having sex. How do you create a safe space for actors to be able to explore these kind of darker areas while still maintaining the duty of care? Because we did talk about it with the students that you worked with, where there was the moments of them kind of like coming to realize, like, maybe I don't want to proceed with this. But how is it that you're still able to touch on darker topics without it becoming too affecting to the actors? Is there like a maneuver or a way that you have around it? Or is it just, as you said, the openness and consent?
So first of all, and again, you asked this a little bit later on, what keeps an actor safe? What keeps an actor safe is serving character and serving storytelling. So first of all, the safety comes from really stepping into character and honouring the storytelling. And that part of the process, when you're interrogating, why is this scene here? How is it serving the storytelling? How is it pushing the storytelling forward? What's it telling us about each character and each character in relationship? And then again, there's fundamentals that the bog standard actor questions who, what, where, when, and why. And when those questions are interrogated with your director, if they can't be answered, then very quickly you know that it's a gratuitous scene. And so that's where in the past, there'd be something happen and suddenly this sex scene is like from nowhere. That doesn't happen anymore. And I'm very joyous that doesn't happen anymore. And also my awareness that that's what keeps the actor safe, because those kind of gratuitous sex scenes, suddenly that's where an actor would feel vulnerable because suddenly they're performing something that was out of somewhere else. So in challenging intimate scenes, and again, it's, in our conversation, we're talking about, this isn't about love. This is about power. This is about the dynamic of someone taking something from someone else without their consent. So again, when you're investigating it like that and you're looking at, so what's going on here? And then we're going, is this an important part of the storytelling? And again, with Michaela's writing, and I May Destroy You, oh my goodness. Her exploration of that play of the grey area of consent. So there's moments that were so clear, that is abuse, that is not abuse. But then the places at the grey area of consent. And then certainly with this particular storyline, I didn't actually know that this act, which is called stealthing, which is starting with consensual sex where you're using a condom. And then if that condom is taken off without knowledge of the participating, person who is being penetrated with their agreement and consent, then that is rape. So I didn't know that. So that was something that educated me. So obviously all of us were, in our conversations were having those in-depth conversations about why is this here? What is it showing us? What is it telling us? And that was an integral part of this character of Zane's storytelling. And then how she outs this character. This very public outing was a very important part of that storytelling. So of course that moment has to happen for us to investigate what this kind of rape is and then through to the outing. So that's all part of the artistic conversations happening that lets everybody know that they're behind and support those character storytelling. And then you're stepping into the actor's agreement and consent of, what they're happy to show nakedness wise, what they're happy to show nudity wise. We're also checking out what the streaming platform allows. So sometimes the actor might be happy to be naked breasts and naked nipples, but actually the streaming platform says our policy is we can't see naked nipples. So all of those things you're checking out. And so that journey would have been done. Yeah. And then we choreograph it really clearly. And again, that choreography happened where I was there with them, in a relaxed, comfortable way with tracksuit bottoms on again, we touched on, genitalia cushions and things like that, which we can get to in a second, way before the day on set. So that then when we have the day on set, everybody knows what's happening, they're comfortable again. And so the next thing is when there is abusive, intimate content, it's even more important that you have that in-depth emotional story mapped out. When what's the power play, who's doing what to whom, when might that power shift, so we know all of that. And then when we come to choreograph it, we throw all the emotion out and we just choreograph with bare bones of just physicalness, with no emotion whatsoever. So it means that then you can just be really pragmatic and actual with choreography and energy and, hand placements and everything, and just save any emotional storytelling. Again, when you refine that choreography on the day on set, it's really clean, what I call clean, just actual. So there's safety in that sense. And again, that sense of the actor being really present, mind, body and spirit presence. Yeah. And looking in someone's eyes and checking out. And actually, I think I remember on that day, again, that sense of doing a physical warm up. And I think by then I have the joy of, the director and the DOP would join us in the physical warm up. So all we'd be in the bedroom on set, all doing a warm up, getting into our energy with a really good playlist, so that everybody's there and present and literally in sync with each other and enjoy with each other and in fun with each other and in warmed up physicality. And then we can step in, clear choreography. And then when camera rolls, then you can really bring in the dynamic of the emotional storytelling of the perpetrator and the victim.
And looking at another area which I really loved, and I didn't really think about this until reading your book and obviously going back and reviewing the episode itself, because I remember watching this episode of Sex Education where the character Lily was living with a condition called vaginismus. And during the encounter, she was not only kind of uncomfortable during it, she was also explaining the condition itself. So how, for you, important has it been to kind of see in your work as well the exploration of maybe other areas of kind of the intimate kind of situations that previously probably wouldn't have been explored, especially maybe hearing the term vaginismus probably discussed on a very big hit TV show. Is it kind of strange for you now, looking back?
It's absolutely wonderful. And I really invite, so call to arms, writers out there, write really wonderful intimate scenes. So the anatomy of arousal, write it so that it's detailed and correct. If you're not sure, get my book. The Anatomy of Arousal is in the Myth and Reality of Sexual Arousal chapter, which is chapter 8. And then, even more importantly, the anatomy of our dysfunction. And the reality is that 30 to 40% of people, men and women alike, will experience some form, and I'm quoting from my book here, of sexual dysfunction at some point in their lives. Knowing this not only helps us to approach the subject with empathy, but also reminds us that these experiences are far more common than we might think. And it's really important that people talk about it. So I'm going to say, some conditions of female sexual dysfunction include vaginismus. And again, how wonderfully it was portrayed in sex education. It lifts the lid, so lets everybody out there who experiences that to go, oh, I am normal, and then for it to be opened out and to be something that you can speak about. For men, the aspect of not being able to gain an erection. So I worked on the absolutely wonderful TV film called Men Up that explores men who could not get an erection, and the development of Viagra. And again, how it explored that condition and the huge ripple effects that it had, not just on the men's lives, but into their relationships, be them, male-male relationships or male-female relationships. And I'm so proud to be able to support, those storytellings, and they're so important. And I really invite more, more people, just really inviting more writing about all these gamuts of how we are in our intimate lives. And then, as in I May Destroy You, more storytellings of the realities of the functions of periods, menstruating, sex on periods, which again, Michaela's writing was utterly superb. And then more writing about menopause and intimacy during our menopause and afterwards. And then, as I touch on in my last chapter, the enchantress. So our time of life called the enchantress, as in that postmenopausal, when we're full of energy, full of beauty, full of desire, full of experience, and to really, how do we explore and enjoy our intimacy postmenopausal, and then further on into our, later years in life. And as I said, I did supported a wonderful photo shoot that was a Relate commission, photographed by Rankin, and this was real couples, who were 70s, 80s, with the most beautiful pictures, and then them sharing their experience of their intimacy into their older years, and again lifting the lid and talking about it and going, this is natural, it's normal, it's joyous, it's glorious, it's beautiful, and we need it. This is part of who we are as human beings, to reach out and hold that hand, to have that hug. And then that's also where, one of my realizations in this book is becoming consciously conscious of the rainbow of all of our forms of intimacy. We have, familial intimacy, emotional intimacy, spiritual intimacy, intellectual intimacy, our physical intimacy, and then into our sensual and sexual intimacy. They're all different, and they actually all play in to our intimate lives. And that's something that was like, oh, okay. So, when you have that frisson with someone, you love sparring with them, or you want to go for a walk in the woods with someone, or again, as I say, just that touch and intimacy of just dancing in the kitchen together. All of those are part of what lead and build and keep that intimate connection, and not negating any of that. Just going, oh, well, only that is sex and only that is intimacy. It's lifting the lid off that. So I hope that the book inspires you in that way.
We'll be right back in just a moment. The Beyond Broadcast Podcast.
Massively. And I think we need to touch on it a little bit more, Ita, because as we mentioned at the beginning, you're releasing your book, Intimacy, a Field Guide to Finding Connection and Feeling Your Deep Desires. The paperback version should be released June 4th in the UK. And I think one thing I really want to go into, or a couple of things I should really say, is as you just mentioned, you spoke about intimacy being something that is much broader than just sexuality itself. And reading the book itself as well, there was a couple of things I discovered, which was, I guess, my own shame and I guess embarrassment about exploring the topic. And even when I was reading your book, I kind of realized how prudish and conservative I am. And do you think we are becoming a little bit more as a society disconnected from intimacy? Because I think it was a really interesting passage. You talked about the idea of like the connection being lost with social media, among other things. Younger people not really understanding that intimacy is not just, as you said, sex and everything else. There's a lot more to it. Do you think we're losing an element of that? And by not displaying it? Yeah.
So first of all, joyously, what I'm sharing in this book is my realization of when you lift the lid and you're invited and given a structure and a process to talk about the intimate content openly, professionally, actually saying, rather than it being something that should be shameful and should be hidden and should not be talked about, when you lift the lid and it becomes something open and professional and dreaming into it and joyous and edgy and can explore something more exciting than you might do, then something really joyous can happen about how the journey then, once that happens, you're already changed. And that's what I'm inviting in our own lives is, wow, if your intimate content is important to you in your life, lifting the lid of it and knowing that, why should we know? And that goes right from our teenage kids, but to ourselves as well. As I'm a postmenopausal woman, why should I know what the ins and outs are of how my body will change, how I can support my body to stay, juicy and lovely and sexually active? How do I know what different positions, can try out or might be good? Go away and explore it. And that's also just exploring places that aren't necessarily or certainly not pornography and certainly not tantric sex, or tantric sex is wonderful if that's what you want, but where can you just go to explore and be inquisitive and open out your mind that it's good and it's right and proper to continue being curious and learning about your own body, first of all. And then, sorry, forgotten the question. Remind me of the question again.
No problem at all. So the question being, are we as a society becoming a bit more disconnected from intimacy, especially our young people?
So that's, first of all, lifting the lid. And then we have to just become real about how we are living our lives. So here we are. You're in Argentina. I'm in Kent in the UK. We're going to be sharing this with people in New Zealand and across the globe. That is joyous. This is magic. Yeah, so we can't vilify this. This is amazing. What our internet gives us, what our lives on screens gives us is truly, truly wonderful. So let's not vilify it, but let's also be conscious about what it takes away. And that's what I'm really offering, is saying and acknowledging that our young people, the more and more they're living lives on the screens, so what are they doing? My son connects with his friends and he's playing Dungeons and Dragons or whatever, and they've got their Discord on, so they're talking to each other and their avatars are doing this and their bodies are twitching and their hands are doing this. So their connection and their friendships are there, but what's actually happening in the body? And I'm saying, let's stay conscious about what's actually happening in the body. And then it means that we need to be more conscious then about how we do take care of being connected in our body, about having that physical connection, about having that physical awareness and aliveness in our body. And so I'm a huge advocate of trying to do as much as possible in nature, trying to, go for a walk in nature, go and do exercise out in nature, breathe in the air fully, to literally help to wake up your brain. And that's where a huge part of the book is in that place of our embodied selves. And again, if we want to have a sensuous and sensual body, then we need to be, as I said, so many of the exercises are that support in that shift to listening to your body, listening to your impulses, listening to what's right for you, so that you can have an awakened and sensuous and sensual body, then in order to be able to ask for what you want with your partners. But that takes conscious awareness, and then particularly with our younger people, to help them to both honor and love, how they live their lives and what they're receiving from TikTok and Instagram and what the internet gives them, but also to help them to call their boundaries in how they use it. And this is and this is where then there's talk about banning sites. Well, I think whenever anything's banned, then it forms a dynamic where then someone wants it even more.
100%.
But what I do, I'm not sure that's the way to go. But what I do believe in is helping teach our young people boundaries. I so feel for young people, or parents with teenagers, this whole aspect of the easily accessible and being sold pornographic images and sites. But again, teaching your kids boundaries and having that open conversation. So that's where the next thing is, with our sexuality and our sensuality, and how our parents teach our young people. Well, for me, first of all, it comes from, respect with yourself, which again has to come from inviting parents with our young people. And when I say young people, I mean right from the age of doctor, what do you feel? Listening to yourself, honouring and respecting our young people, so as they go into our schools that they can listen to themselves. And if that's given, the idea of respect for yourself, how do you want to be treated? What do you feel? What do you want? What do you need for our young boys, girls, whatever, trans, however someone wants to express themselves, to respect themselves, and then to give our young people a language to be able to ask for what they want, respect each other. And I feel if we start from that bedrock of consent, of respect, then we can build consent on that. But it comes from being in our bodies, listening to our bodies. So I really invite everybody to get the audiobook if you're interested in the exercises, because then throughout I've given exercises. So it starts from 20 connected breaths and then going into body pleasuring, which is about just lying on the floor and listening. How do my arms and chest want to express and move and stretch? How do my legs want to move and stretch? And then into being connected into the floor with your feet, walking barefoot, massaging the feet, and then that journey through to lovely stretches, which are called the 8 silken movements, and then understanding then how we stretch out into our kinesphere, and then how our kinesphere is shared with others. So you become conscious about really taking your space and the joy, then connecting that with others. So all of those exercises are written in the book, but if you get the audio book, all the exercises that are designed to be done physically are underscored with music. And this is what I invite to for ourselves as adults, but also to our children, or just stay connected, be physical. So parents, take your kids out. We used to go camping with our kids. So if there isn't a plug and the phone runs out, you can't recharge it, what are they going to do? By default, they're forced to sort of do something physical, go and climb trees. And then I'm really, it's a really wonderful resource at the end of the sex education chapter, is a whole list of books to support parents speaking to their children, because it starts from there, isn't it? And it's hard. There's Jamie, us both acknowledging we come from places where it was, shame, secrecy, and silence. Well, if you want to help your children to be connected with themselves, respect themselves, and then have a language and understand about consent way before, so it has to be a bedrock way before, and then listening and talking about sensuality and sexuality and a positive sexual awakening. Again, lifting the shame and going to be a sensual, sexual human being is part of our fundamental humanity, and our genitalia is designed to give us pleasure. So let's lift the lid instead of it being this awful thing of don't get pregnant, don't get an STD, fear-based, and lift the lid for our young boys, young girls, young trans people to listen to themselves, but to know but to know that our sexual connection is about human to human, person to person, which involves how you feel, be it you choose to have your one night stand or you're into a longer term relationship. So we dovetail it with that. And that's when our young people, they have a void of nothing that's teaching them something positive, then of course they're going to turn to where they feel they're going to learn, which is pornography, that then gives them images of intimacy without emotion, without, really caring human connection. And then also shows them aspects that are so, things like strangulation, that what they're seeing is that it's something that's normal, and it just isn't. If you choose to explore that in your sexual play, then to know about it, that's quite an adult thing. It can so quickly become so dangerous. So again, it's not vilifying anything, but age appropriate. So that's where, this, at the end of the chapter, page 278, it starts age appropriate books. We start off with books for parents, and then books for younger people, and then books for teenagers. So there's a wonderful resource there. So yes, we are being less physical, can't vilify it, but let's really be conscious about it, and then let's help support particularly our younger people to have an alternative, to be present in their bodies, to be active, to be listening to themselves, to respect themselves and have fundamental agreement and consent. So again, we sort of be an antithesis to what's being sold out in the world. Just to finish off, sort of the likes of Andrew Tate, and then the kind of behaviour that's coming from the leaders in, so some of the places across the globe that are rolling back on fundamental human respect, rolling back on respect for people from all ethnicities and the global majority, rolling back on, sort of LGBTQ rights, rolling back on women's rights around their own bodies. All of this is incredibly damaging, and it's sort of giving permission for misogyny. And we just want to, let's try and roll this back and go and continue that sense of loving yourself, nurturing yourself, and then therefore taking that love and nurture and respect of yourself into our relationships and into our sexual relationships for our young people and for ourselves throughout our lives. And that is a big bit of actually what intimacy is offering.
And that was the thing that I loved about the book, is how much it actually encapsulated so many different areas without, I think the preconception I had going into this, this is going to be a book that outlines how we can look at intimacy on film and television, but it actually has a much wider scope of many different things that cover culture, among other things. And one of the things I really loved was the fact that you touched on things like how accurate media portrayal does evolve into obviously how people go through life, because the main way is, as you said, if parents aren't teaching it, they're going to find it somewhere else. If it's not porn, then they're going to look at TV shows, radio, anything that they can get their hands on in order to learn about it. And having those kind of displays publicly out there is so important, so people can actually like kind of develop and learn themselves. And one thing I'd really love to touch on as kind of like the final kind of question is, after this, like writing this book, what changed in your understanding in terms of connection? Because I imagine throughout this whole process, you must have learnt a lot.
Oh, so much. I mean, as I said, the first revelation is, when I started writing the book, the intention was the joy of sharing my embodied, physical practice, starting from being a dancer, loving dancing from the age of 3. As I say, all these wonderful practitioners that I've worked with, Bonnie Bainbridge-Cohen, Jill Peirce, then Laban, 5 rhythms, elemental work, animal work, all of it has given me something, and I'm sharing something from each of those, again, as different parts of my embodied practice. But like I say, is that realization of, when talking openly and considering openly who I am in my sexual being and then into my relationships, which is such an antithesis as we come full circle from where I was as from my family background. Look at the joy that brings and the ease that brings and the acknowledgement. And then, learning about, sort of delving further into the anatomy of arousal that the, couples therapist, so I worked with Lindsay Blair, but also talking to Dr. Orna Gralnick, and just opening it out and making it natural and normal, and then education, educating the anatomy of arousal, sort of for everybody. Everybody needs to learn this, so just so that men and women, boys and girls are taught it all. Our kids should be taught not just about, about all of this and about menstruation and about menopause, because so that we lift the lid and we understand the flow and the journey, and then we can be informed to actually, and as the amazing Dr. Siobhan O'Higgins, who I've worked with closely in the sex education chapter, saying, good education and good sex education doesn't ruin our kids' intimacy, it helps them preserve it, and that's overall for all of us. Is sort of like, I've been educated so much more completely, and it only brings joy and openness and excitement for how you can continue exploring and how you can make it the best, for yourself as you go forward in your relationships. And so that's what I've learned, and I hope that I can communicate that out in the world.
For listening to this episode of the Beyond Broadcast podcast, proudly sponsored by WizFX, specialists in audio branding. If you enjoyed the show, give a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform. You can connect with the show on Instagram at Beyond Broadcast Pod and subscribe for updates on new episodes.